When Emily signed the lease for the old apartment on Ashford Street, she thought she had found the perfect escape. It was small but affordable, tucked inside a building that carried the charm of a forgotten era. The walls were cracked in places, the floorboards creaked under her footsteps, and the hallway smelled faintly of dust and mildew. Still, it felt like a step toward independence. She convinced herself that the flaws were simply signs of character, the kind of imperfections that made a place feel alive. The first night was quiet. She unpacked slowly, stacking books on shelves and setting her coffee maker on the counter. The silence was heavy, but she chalked it up to the building's age. Old places had their moods, their sighs and groans. It was only when she lay in bed, half asleep, that she heard it for the first time, a faint murmur behind the wall near her headboard. She froze, straining to listen. It wasn't plumbing, it wasn't the hum of electricity. It was softer, human, like a whispering conversation just beyond the plaster. She pressed her ear against the wall, holding her breath, and swore she heard syllables, though none she could clearly understand. Her heart hammered. She pulled back, telling herself it must be neighbors. Thin walls maybe, that's all. But when she knocked, 3 sharp raps, silence answered her. No footsteps, no shift of furniture, just silence, stretching on, until she almost laughed at her own paranoia. The next morning, sunlight made everything feel ordinary again. She shook it off, made coffee, and headed to her new job at the bookstore downtown. By the time she came home, exhaustion dulled the edges of her memory. She cooked dinner, read a little, and went to bed. The voices came again. This time, they were clearer, closer, as though someone were leaning right inside the wall, speaking low enough to be almost lost in the static of her own thoughts. She sat up, every muscle tense, staring at the cracks along the plaster. The voices rose and fell, like 2 people speaking urgently, one deep and gravelly, the other higher, almost pleading. Emily whispered into the darkness. "Hello?" The sound stopped. The silence afterward was heavier than before, as though the entire building held its breath. She didn't sleep that night. The days passed in a blur of exhaustion. At work she nodded off while stacking books, jolting awake when her manager barked her name. At home, she found herself listening constantly, waiting for the voices. They didn't always come, but when they did, they seemed to know she was listening. Sometimes they called her name, soft, drawn out, like the breath of someone standing inches from her ear. Other times, they laughed, a low, wet chuckle that made her skin crawl. She told herself she was imagining it. Stress, lack of sleep, the adjustment to living alone. But the more she tried to ignore it, the worse it became. She started hearing faint tapping in the walls during the day, like nails scratching through wood. Once, while brushing her teeth, she swore she saw the wallpaper ripple, as though something beneath it shifted. Finally, after a week of this, she went downstairs to confront the landlord, Mr. Harris. He was an old man with cloudy eyes and a permanent smell of cigarettes clinging to his clothes. "There are noises in the walls," Emily told him. "Voices. I think maybe there's someone in there, or something's wrong with the building." Harris gave her a long, dry stare. "No one's in the walls," he said flatly. "Old pipes, air vents. This place has been standing longer than I've been alive. It groans a little, that's all." "I know the difference between pipes and voices," she pressed, her own voice shaking. "They talk to me. They say my name." He leaned forward, his expression shifting into something colder. "Don't listen to them," he said softly. "That's the only mistake you can make. Don't listen and don't answer. They feed on attention." Emily blinked, stunned. You've heard them." But Harris only shook his head, muttering something under his breath before dismissing her with a wave of his hand. She left his office with her stomach churning. Don't listen, don't answer. The words clung to her like a stain she couldn't wash away. That night, she lay in bed with her headphones on, music blasting to drown out any sound. But in the quiet gaps between songs, she still heard it, the whispering rising like steam through cracks in the world. And this time, the voice was inside the room. Emily sat bolt upright in her bed. The whisper wasn't muffled anymore. It was close, impossibly close, as if someone had crouched at the foot of her bed and breathed her name into the dark. She tore her headphones off and held her breath, staring into the shadows. The room looked normal. Her dresser, the stack of unpacked boxes, the faint streetlight leaking through the blinds. Yet the air felt different, heavier, like the pressure before a storm. Emily. The sound came again. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't in the walls. It was inside the room. She stumbled for the lamp, flicked it on, and flooded the space with yellow light. Nothing, no one, but the corner by the closet seemed darker than it should be, a blackness that didn't belong. She forced herself to look away, whispering to herself that it was just exhaustion, just nerves. For the rest of the night, she sat awake with every light on, staring at the walls and refusing to blink too long. The next day at work, she nearly broke down. She told her coworker, a girl named Lacey, about the voices. She expected laughter, maybe some playful teasing, but instead, Lacey's face went pale. You live on Ashford Street, the old Reeve building. Emily nodded slowly. My uncle used to live there, Lacey said, lowering her voice. He didn't last long. He said he kept hearing things in the walls too, whispers. He thought he was going crazy. Then one night, he just left, didn't even take his stuff. My family never found out where he went. Emily's skin prickled with cold. You joking? I wish I was, Lacey whispered. People say that place is cursed, that something's buried in the walls. I don't know what it is, but if I were you, I'd get out. That night, Emily sat in her apartment, clutching a mug of tea that had long gone cold, replaying Lacey's words over and over. She didn't want to believe it. She couldn't. It was just an old building, that's all. But as the hours dragged on, the whispers returned. This time they weren't hushed or distant. They were deliberate, slow, as though the voices wanted her to hear every word. She's listening, closer now, hungry. Emily's breath came in short gasps. Her heart thudded so loud she thought it might drown them out. She pressed her palms against her ears, rocking back and forth, whispering, "No, no, no." And then came the laugh, low, guttural, bubbling with something wet and broken. It rattled through the walls, filled the air, seeped into her bones. She screamed and hurled her mug at the wall. Porcelain shattered, and silence followed. But as she stared at the mess on the floor, she told herself she was imagining it. Stress, lack of sleep, the adjustment to living alone. But the more she tried to ignore it, the worse it became. She started hearing faint tapping in the walls during the day, like nails scratching through wood. Once, while brushing her teeth, she swore she saw the wallpaper ripple, as though something beneath it shifted. Finally, after a week of this, she went downstairs to confront the landlord, Mr. Harris, something breathing. And then faintly, from deep within the wall, came the sound of fingernails dragging across wood. Emily barely slept. Every time her eyes drifted shut, she'd jolt awake, convinced something was crawling out of the cracks. By morning, the black stain had dried into a brittle smear, almost like soot. She cleaned it with shaking hands, scrubbing until her knuckles ached. But no matter how hard she tried, the smell lingered, metallic damp, like blood soaked into wood. She couldn't live like this. She needed answers. That afternoon, instead of going straight home from work, she stopped at the library. The Reeve building had to have some history, and she was determined to find it. The old town archives smelled of paper and mildew, but after an hour of searching, she found a slim folder marked Ashford Street Properties. The Reeve building had been a boarding house in the 1940s. The notes were sparse, but one headline caught her eye: tenant disappearance unsolved. She scanned the article with growing dread. A young woman named Sarah Whitfield had gone missing from her room in 1949. Neighbors claimed they heard screaming in the walls the night she vanished. But when police searched, they found nothing, no body, no forced entry. The case went cold. Emily slammed the folder shut, her pulse racing, screaming in the walls. When she returned to her apartment that evening, the hallway felt different. The lights flickered, the air was thick with a faint humming, almost like a vibration in her bones. She unlocked her door and froze. The wallpaper in her living room was peeling back, curling at the edges like burned paper. She hadn't touched it. Beneath the ripped section, the plaster was gouged with deep scratches, as if something had been clawing from the inside. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her so badly she nearly dropped it. A text from an unknown number. He opened it slowly, his face pale, eyes red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept in minutes. "You texted me," she demanded. His expression twisted, and for a moment she thought he might deny it. But instead, he stepped back and motioned her inside. The office smelled of stale smoke and dust. Piles of papers were stacked on every surface, but one wall caught her attention. It was covered in newspaper clippings, all yellowed with age, missing persons, tenants who had vanished from the building, every decade, sometimes every few years, always unexplained. "I warned you," Harris said hoarsely, lowering himself into a chair. "The voices aren't people, they're what's left of them. Once you hear them, really hear them, you don't stop. They want you to answer. That's how they pull you in." Emily's skin crawled. "Pull me in." "Into what?" He shook his head. "The walls aren't just walls. They're hungry. Always have been. This place, it feeds." She stared at him in disbelief. "That's insane. You expect me to believe the building needs people?" His eyes narrowed. "Believe whatever you want. But if you've already spoken back," he cut himself off. Emily felt cold all over. "What happens if I did?" For the first time, true fear flickered across the old man's face. "Then it already knows your voice." Emily stepped back from the landlord's desk, her stomach twisting. His words clung to her like ice. "It knows your voice." She remembered the night she whispered hello into the dark. She had spoken. She had answered. "Tell me how to stop it," she demanded, her voice trembling. "There has to be a way." But Harris only looked at her with tired, hollow eyes. "There's no stopping it. You can leave, but it doesn't matter. Once you've answered, it follows. Wherever you go, the voices will find you. This place is a mouth, and it doesn't let go." Emily felt the walls of the office closing in, the silence pressing against her ears. She bolted, racing up the stairwell to her apartment, throwing the door open as if she could somehow beat the darkness inside. The apartment was alive. The walls pulsed faintly, like skin stretched too tight over something moving beneath. Cracks split wider, spilling that same black ooze, slick and glistening. From within the walls, the whispers rose in a chorus, hundreds of voices overlapping, desperate, laughing, screaming. "Emily, stay with us, don't leave." The sound drilled into her skull, an endless time of hunger. She clapped her hands over her ears, but it didn't matter. The voices were inside her head, wrapping around her thoughts. She stumbled to the door, but the knob wouldn't turn. She yanked harder, panicking, but it was fused, as though the wood itself had swallowed it. Her breath came fast and ragged, as the voices grew louder, rising into a frenzy. The walls began to split open. She watched in horror, as pale human fingers pushed through the cracks, clawing for space. Arms, faces, broken eyes peered out of the plaster, their mouths opening wide, but never matching the words she heard. They weren't speaking, they were echoing, like the building itself was speaking through them. Emily screamed, and backed toward the center of the room as the walls buckled inward. Faces pressing, skin stretching thin, mouths opening wider and wider until they were nothing but voids. The air reeked of rot and damp earth. "Answer us," they hissed. "Come closer." Something brushed her ankle. She looked down and saw a hand, pale and slick, reaching up from the gap in the floorboards. She kicked free, sobbing, but more hands followed, grasping, pulling, trying to drag her down. She ran for the window, slamming it open,